Dear guests, welcome. Good morning, good afternoon. This is Serhat Süha Çubukçuoğlu. I'm a senior researcher and the head of Turkey program at Trends Research and Advisory in Abu Dhabi, UAE. We are here at Harici Studios in Istanbul, Turkey, with our partner Harici and a distinguished guest from our community of non-resident experts, researchers here in Turkey, Professor Hasan Ünal, Professor of International Relations at Başkent University in Ankara. Welcome, Professor Ünal.
Thank you very much. Yes.
It's a pleasure and a great honor to have you with us here today.
Pleasure is mine.
We're going to discuss about multipolarity, the changing world order, shifting balance of power, especially looking at what the recent events, changes of dynamics here in the Middle East might mean for the rest of the world, and Turkey's position in it. And I'll be probing your insights, your expertise with a deep experience and background in these issues over the past decades to please enlighten us on what's going on in our world around us. So let us start.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, we are, I think, at the threshold of major transformations in the world. Major transformations in the sense that the world is certainly moving on to a new stage where multipolarity is going to prevail. And we are also at the threshold of major transformations in the sense that the neoliberal economic policies, which the collective West basically imposed on the rest of the world, is also likely to crumble in various ways. And for instance, in the case of multipolarity, I would say that the world has, in terms of balance of power politics, has always been multipolar. Just a cursory look at the last 500 years or so, and particularly for the struggle among major European powers for mastery in Europe and the world, the first thing that basically comes out is that the world was always multipolar in terms of balance of power. What does that mean? You know, for instance, in the 1500s, initially the Portuguese, and then Spaniards, and then the emergence of France, and France becoming a formidable power under Louis XIV, and then the emergence of England as a result of the Spanish Succession War, and then unification of Italy and Germany, and the rise of Russia from the East, and all that. Basically, when we look at all of that, what we see clearly out of all that is that the world was always multipolar. And this, the First World War was basically fought on a multipolar basis, and the politics of the world in the interwar period from the end of First World War to the Second World War was also multipolar. And the Second World War was also fought again in a multipolar world order. Bipolarity was some sort of an exception to the rule. Yeah. But even then, what we can call the multipolar period wasn't necessarily terribly bipolar.
Bipolar, yeah.
Okay, in one sense it was bipolar because there was also the ideological dimension to the balance of power. So the Western world basically called it the free world versus the communist world, communist dictatorships and blah, blah. But deep down, from the Chinese, Sino-China conflict in the 1950s, and particularly in the 60s onwards, and the coming together of the non-allied movement, it wasn't bipolar either. It was, again, one way or the other, multipolar. The unipolarity was absolutely an exception to the rule. You know, you can't have unipolar world order. there would always be a challenger to the unipolar world order, or several challengers. So it was never a surprise to me that initially Russia, China, and others basically challenged the unipolar world order. But the United States and the collective West basically insisted that the unipolar world order was the basis of law and order across the world, as they called it, rules-based order.
Rules-based.
Rules-based order. Who basically
set up the rules?
Sets up the rules? Yes. Whose rules against whom? And then it is like, for instance, the lions and the others basically setting up the rules and expecting all the praise
to obey
the rules, something like that. This was certainly unsustainable, and as we can see today, the main challengers to that are Russia, China, Iran, and others. And with the war basically starting in Ukraine, all the African nations, South American nations, Eurasian nations, all coming out to basically get united, particularly in the form of BRICS, for instance, to present a united front. It doesn't necessarily mean a front that would collide with the West, with the United States and its allies head on in every aspect, but it is certainly an attempt at bringing all the frustrated countries together, even in some cases countries like Turkey, which is on the one hand a member of NATO, but at the same time an aspiring BRICS nation and all that. So we are, in that sense, at the threshold of major transformation in world order. And in terms of the end of the neoliberal economies, well, there isn't much to say about it except to just look at the poor state of affairs in American and Western economies, and also the strong economic development and economic growth that has been sustained by a country like China.
Like China and most of East Asia as well.
Exactly.
That actually brings me to our region here in the Middle East. I'd like to tie up that with your excellent overview of the multipolar world order that we inhabit today. Let's think about the region in flux here in the Middle East. During the upheaval, over the past year and a half, that started with the war in Gaza and spread to Lebanon, now Syria. We saw Russia, the US, and the European Union, inject themselves or insert themselves at various levels. But China, to be honest, was nowhere to be seen or heard, at least not to the extent that the others were. How should we position China in this changing regional complex? Does it have real military capabilities to project power or a geopolitical strategy even? Or is it driven mainly by commercial economic interests? In other words, how do you see China's involvement in the Middle East amid shifting geopolitical sands and the more assertive Trump administration in Washington?
Well, I think it depends on where you look at it. For instance, if you look at it from a historical perspective, China seems to be quite involved in Middle Eastern affairs over the last, particularly 10 years or so, particularly with the Syria war. In this sense, for instance, it was China which actually brokered a, how shall I say, if not full-fledged peace between the Gulf Arab states, in particular Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates on the one side, and Iran on the other. Side, but it was Chinese diplomatic initiatives that actually brought those countries together one way or the other, leading to the resumption of their diplomatic relations. So that's a very important initiative.
Course, yeah.
The second thing, it wasn't the first time that China initiated, but there is the China-Arab League initiative.
Yes.
It had been going on, but last year and this year, basically these initiatives certainly took a new dimension. For instance, this year when China brought together the foreign ministers of the Arab League countries, including some of the leaders like the Egyptian leader and some other Arab countries in Beijing, it was certainly a big diplomatic initiative. And also, it was done at a time of the Israeli genocidal war in Gaza. So the China initiative was much appreciated and much applauded, but it also gave boost to the China-Arab rapprochement in every sense. The other initiative we can talk about is the Beijing's efforts to bring together all the factions of the Palestinian resistance groups. So the Palestinian Authority, the Hamas being the major two ones, but also 12 others, altogether 14, if I'm not mistaken, Palestinian groups were brought together by China in Beijing, and they decided to coordinate their efforts to resist Israeli occupation and Israeli, Israeli invasion of Palestinian territories, and Israeli also efforts to destroy not only Gaza but also West Bank.
Yeah.
And also to resist the Israeli policy of settlers, new settlers in West Bank. So, plus, again, there's China here and there. They entertained Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian leader, in Beijing in a grand way. They also entertained the Syrian leader, Bashar al-Assad, who is now gone. Diplomatically, China is much more involved in the Middle East than in the past decades. The other thing is, you can say, for instance, where is China militarily in the Middle East? Well, China doesn't get involved militarily in any part of the world. It certainly flexes its muscles when it comes to American efforts to bolster up Taiwan against mainland China. But apart from that, China doesn't actually show so much teeth in its foreign policy efforts. And therefore, they hardly use their military muscles to pinpoint China's, how shall I say, interest here and there. For instance, they have been actively involved in Africa, across Africa, and there doesn't appear to be any major Chinese military bases in any part of Africa. So it's not like the United States in the Western world, which in the past, the Europeans, now the Americans, basically use military force against anybody, everybody, and then they basically keep certain pieces of territories as their military bases. And in the past, they used to go over and invade and occupy territories, then they turn them into their colonies and blah, blah. China doesn't seem to work like that. And in that sense, the Chinese perhaps are more trusted than the Western countries. For instance, when the Saudis and the Gulf Arab countries basically warmed up to China and accepted the Chinese mediation with Iran, I think all this certainly...
It's a show of trust for China.
Yeah.
So we can summarize it as in the following way: China is not using or deploying coercive diplomacy to achieve global hegemony, but rather multilateralism and equitable partnership through economic means, investment, business ties, and cultural contacts, in relationships, to gradually, step by step, build up its equity throughout the region, a civilizational approach.
Civilizational approach through which it says, look, no civilization is superior than the others. Okay, so all this, we have to respect all the civilizations.
Totally. So in the context of the evolving multipolar international order, Professor Ünal, how do you assess Turkey's pursuit of strategic autonomy, especially considering its relationships with both Western allies and non-Western powers? That is to say, how do you envision its role in shaping regional stability and contributing to the broader multipolar world order?
Well, except certain things, Turkey seems to be doing that quite well. For instance, particularly in Ukraine, although it was a NATO member, not only just a NATO member, but a reliable, old, long-time member of NATO, with the second biggest armed forces within the alliance, a country that contributes to NATO's intelligence gathering, to the security that the alliance provides for its neighbors, more than what it needs. Okay, so it contributes more to NATO than what it consumes from NATO. In terms of intelligence, in terms of global security and what have you. Despite all that, it did not join in anti-Russian sanctions imposed by Western countries. It actually not only did not join in anti-Russia sanctions, but also it cultivated more and better ties to Moscow. It didn't close off its airspace to Russian aircraft, civilian aircraft. Plus, it has a good political consultation on a political consultation mechanism of some sort on regional affairs. For instance, Turco-Russia rapprochement was quite instrumental in Azerbaijan liberating its occupied territories. Again, yes. And so you can actually come up with other examples, but it suffices to say that Turkey has shaped a strategic autonomy in which it molds its foreign policy. And this is now being recognized by the West. So one way or the other, they understand that this is going to be Turkey, this is going to be new Turkey, if you like, in terms of foreign policy engagements and foreign policy exercises, if you like. And under Trump, this can actually go, this can work even better, depending on what Turkey might or might not do in the Middle East in particular. For instance, by now, Turkey's been very vociferous in its criticism of Israel. And Trump administration is going to be very pro-Israel, although this doesn't mean that Trump is going to let Israel loose on everybody in the region, because they don't want wars. But at the same time, one has to say that you can't be on terribly good terms with the United States while at the same time an almost hostile country to Israel. So there has to be some remaking of Turkish policy in the Middle East. Plus, with the latest that has unfolded in Syria, whether or not Russia in particular sees betrayal by Turkey or not, even if it does sees betrayed by Turkey, whether or not it is going to basically bring it into the open dispute in particular with Turkey and say, well, look, you know, I have trusted you in that Idlib business, but then you let the HTS run over Syria's lines of defenses and all that. I would say that, again, the Russians need Turkey quite a bit, particularly at a time when, you know, you look at it from the other way around. For instance, if Turkey had been together with Biden administration, basically bringing the war into the Black Sea, the Caucasus, and elsewhere, Russia in the Black Sea would have been vulnerable to all sorts of things. And the Russians, being quite sober-minded, do appreciate this. But in what light would they see Turkish policy and the latest developments in Syria remains to be seen. Even if they see betrayal on the part of Turkey, I would think they are not going to disclose it. You know, they are going to keep it private to themselves, and because they need Turkey on a variety of matters. But this doesn't mean Turkey doesn't need Russia. Turkey needs Russia as much as Russia needs Turkey. So we'll have to wait and see. With China, Turkey again seems to have forged quite good relations, but occasionally this Uyghur business pops up. From my point of view, quite on an unnecessary basis, because we don't know what the Uyghur matters are exactly, and we don't know much about the situation. Even if we do, and even if we, you know, even if there is something you don't approve, then there isn't much you can do. Plus, we didn't set up the Turkish Republic to prop up Uyghur region of China, basically. So I don't see any national interest there. But the Turkish government, the incumbent government, occasionally makes that connection, which the Chinese side doesn't see helpful, which is quite understandable. You know, perhaps the Chinese and the Turkish side will have to
come to terms on that somehow. You know,
come to terms with that point, you know, one way or the other. There's some 6 months ago, or a little more than that perhaps, during the official visit of the Turkish foreign minister, so he was quite, you know, he expressed himself quite in line with China's security policy, with China's multipolarity. He was quite critical of the Western powers and their colonial legacy and blah, blah. You know, he was quite, I mean, on that basis, I can see no problem between Turkey and China. So, yes, the answer to the question, the short question, yes, Turkey has, you know, acquired or shaped a clear strategic autonomy in making its foreign policy in the multipolar world order. And with the Team Biden gun, I think this will be more and more, how shall I say, more noticeable.
Yeah, we'll find more space, perhaps, more maneuverability in the region. You touched on Turkey's heightened position and a more activist role after the recent upheaval in Syria. and a potential reaction to that from, like, say, of Russia. It's important because earlier you also touched on Turkey's application or interest to join BRICS, which ties in with my next question, because in October, Turkey announced officially its intention to apply for BRICS membership, which at the time, I mean, based on my discussions also, was viewed under a positive light, both in Moscow and in Beijing. Just to recall, Turkey is also a dialogue partner to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and not long ago, President Erdogan expressed Turkey's interest or aim to become a member to the SCO. But after the implosion in Syria and the alleged role that Turkey has in it, as you also mentioned, and the setback in the so-called axis of resistance led by Russia and Iran, how likely do you think that these capitals are going to support Turkey's accession to BRICS, and how might it manage these tensions and competing interests? Because it's out in the open now. I mean, even the heads of the intelligence agencies of the UK and US at the highest level announced Russia and China as their prime contestants. So how can Turkey manage on one hand NATO and the EU, and the BRICS and the SCO on the other hand?
Well, if I was Russia or Iran in particular, I would be frustrated with Turkey and the role Turkey played in Syria lately. Mm-hmm. But the trouble is, if you are a state, you're not an individual. Sometimes individuals basically make hasty decisions, not necessarily in line with their personal interests. But states will have to make sober-minded decisions. Yeah. And when it comes to making sober-minded decisions, I would say neither Russia nor China nor Iran would block the way Turkey would become the member of BRICS. Because if I was Russia or Iran, and again, by implication, China, I would let Turkey in so that I would give Turkey opportunity to actually play this autonomous foreign policy out.
Yeah.
Because the more autonomous Turkish foreign policy goes along the line, then the more likely you would have relations of an economic, trading kind with Ankara. If you basically close the door on Turkey's face, then you would have a Turkey which would be more closely interacting with the West only. Mm-hmm. So I would expect the BRICS members to be more considerate on this, whatever might have happened in Syria.
Mm-hmm. Professor, I'd like to ask a question related to the recent upheaval in Syria and Turkey's perceived position in the region. We read in realist international relations tradition that a rising power often attracts opposition or an opposing coalition from would-be contenders in the region because of the perceived differences in relative power. Has Turkey's relative power compared to other middle powers, let's say in the wider Middle East, increased do you think, in their eyes? And would that attract a sort of reaction or an opposing coalition of interests that would make Turkey's position a bit difficult in the new equilibrium?
Well, I would think, I'm not one of those, let me put it this way, who was terribly enthusiastic about Turkey's involvement in Syria war.
Yeah.
Indeed, from 2011 onwards, when Turkey changed its policy overnight towards Syria, I was consistently quite critical of Turkey's handling of Syria affairs, indeed quite a vociferous critique. And I stick to my guns. We should never have got involved in Syria business. And if Turkey had not involved itself in Syria in such a big way, the Syrian war would never have got that extensive. It would have been, if Turkey had not been hand in glove with the Western powers, with the United States, Britain, and others in toppling Assad, then there wouldn't have been so many millions of people pushed out
Refugees,
of their homes. There wouldn't have been, we wouldn't have had a huge problem of unwanted refugees. And, we would have, Syria would have remained somewhat, or at least relatively stable country of some sort.
Yeah.
Now, with things changed completely in Syria, the general mood in this country is one of victory. So we've done this. So we've basically toppled Assad. I didn't have any problem with Assad, for instance, as an expert and individual. Nor would I think that the Turkish people ever had any problem with Assad government. Calling a government dictator in the Middle East is like a joke.
Yeah.
What do you mean a dictator? What makes a dictator in a region where you have strong governments, let's put it this way. But in each and every government in the Middle East, there are checks and balances, societal checks and balances, economics checks and balances, and, even, how shall I say, as I said, societal or, other checks and balances and what have you. So you can't basically interfere with the internal affairs of a neighboring country like that. This is something Atatürk taught us from the right beginning. You should never get involved in, never got meddled.
In Middle Eastern internal conflicts,
in any country's internal affairs, it's no good. Yeah. And the second thing now with Assad gone, whether new Syria is going to offer Turkey opportunities, I would say it's going to be more challenges that it is going to offer. I mean, Syria might not escape from the fate of breakdown altogether into pieces. Basically with Israel bombing Syria at ease now and turning the country militarily into an archaeological site, if you like, with no state authority providing safety and or security, it can easily go into anarchy of all sorts. And the country could break up. And what would you do under the circumstances? Who is going to provide what? The other thing is, if Syria were to be broken up into pieces, then how would you deal with the PKK, PYD held areas to the northeast of Euphrates? That's another question. If Trump basically leaves Syria altogether, okay, you can deal with it through the use of your own military. But if the Americans were to, remain determined to basically collaborate with the PKK, PYD, then again, on the one side, you would have Russia and Iran who don't trust you, even if they don't reveal their frustration with you so much. Then on the other, you would be pitted against the United States, deep state, if you like. And then if you get involved in Syrian politics to such a level, then some Arab countries could easily be critical of you.
Of course.
I would say, because, when it comes to inter-Arab things, you have to be very careful. Because they treat these sort of things as as family businesses, as family affairs. So they get pissed off with each other, but then they make it up. Like Qatar, for instance, made up with Saudi Arabia and other United Arab Emirates in particular, and other Arab countries. So it is no business of Turkey in basically getting in their way. So I am more pessimistic about the future of Syria and Turkey's role in Syria than in the past.
Yeah.
So we'll have to wait and see.
And I totally agree with you. And we have examples of, let's look at Iraq and Libya in front of us, Sudan, Somalia. And
wherever the West has touched.
Yeah, in post-colonial spaces. And there is no appetite for a recreation of, this post-Ottoman, zone of influence in the Middle East, is there? I mean, because we see here in Turkish media here quite a lot of, bamboozing about as though there is, this yearning for a new Ottoman world in this region. But practically, it's very difficult. Secondly, there is no such interest in it from other actors.
The Ottoman past only exists at the back of the political Islamists in Turkey.
Yeah.
There is no country in the Middle East which yearn for it.
Yeah.
All this idealization of the Ottoman past and all that. For instance, they say, if the First World War hadn't been lost, then Aleppo and Hama, Humus, and
Kirkuk or Mosul could be.
Damascus could have been part of Turkey. Well, yes, but if you say it the other way around, for instance, but for the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, Istanbul and the surrounding areas, the whole of the Istanbul, Dardanelles, and what have been, would have come under Russian control, Tsarist control, would have liked that. So in history education as a discipline, there is no such thing as saying, what if blah blah empire didn't lose the war?
Professor Ünal, thank you very much for this, for our conversation. It's been a pleasure with such a tour of our space around in this region, and great to have you with us. I hope we have another conversation soon with you again.
Anytime. It's been my pleasure, and anytime, every time.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us, and please keep following Harici and Trending Echoes. Thank you.